Hello and welcome to another edition of For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. My guests today are from the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. In our first segment, it's wildlife biologist Paul Rigo. First of all, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sean.
For those, they may have heard of the term environmental protection, but what is the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection?
Well, it's an agency that protects the environment and has energy concerns. Only in the last 2 years has the energy portion of the agency joined, and because of that, I'm not as familiar with that. The previous DEP, environmental protection, basically has two sides, one dealing with environmental quality, so pollution, air quality, water quality, even into nuclear a little bit. And then the side that I work for is the environmental conservation side, which deals with all areas of conservation from forestry, fisheries, water, not water quality, but water as a habitat, and the division I work for, which is the wildlife division.
Now, if an agency like this didn't exist, would things run amok in society in general? For the purposes of Connecticut, would industry just kind of like do whatever they wanted? Does there need to be some kind of regulation?
Well, there needs to be regulation, and hopefully it's more cooperation between our agency and the interests of the public and businesses and individuals. So there certainly is a need for our agency and the work that it does.
I know you're not that familiar with the energy part, but what was the reason the state decided to combine them? Is it just like is that a budgetary thing, or?
I think they saw efficiencies there. There are similarities across many different agencies.
Makes sense, right?
At times there's been talk about the Department of Agriculture being joined with the Department of Environmental Protection, but at this stage, certain energy interests are very close to environmental interests.
As far as what you do specifically, what is the state of Connecticut as far as how conservation is going and wildlife protection and things of that sort?
Well, I guess it depends on which group of animals you talk about. Many of our wildlife species are doing very well. In fact, so well that there's a strong need to do management of them. Our deer population,
right.
A growing issue is our bear population.
You see it on the news all the time now.
Oh yes,
yeah.
and I deal with it every day. Coyotes, Canada geese, beaver, many of our species are doing quite well. But then there's lesser known species, many of the songbirds. Later you're going to talk about New England cottontails, species that actually are on the decline and where there's greater interest in their conservation status.
The species that there's an overpopulation, is it simply a matter of there not being natural predators for them, and that's why there's just no control method?
That is a big reason for many of them. Currently in Connecticut, we do not have many large predators that would have been here historically. And actually many of these species are very adaptable. They do much better in association with humans and human development than people ever thought that they would. So.
Yeah, if they're, a lot of times people, and maybe this is a correct assumption or incorrect, but when they see wildlife encroaching on humans' territory, they think that the territory of the wildlife is being reduced, and that's the reason. But maybe a reason, like you had just said, is that they just are able to live alongside of humans without that big of an issue, right?
That's an excellent point. We hear that all the time. People think that, for example, a bear is in a suburban town like Avon or Farmington because its habitat was disturbed somewhere else. But that's not the case. It does still have that habitat somewhere else, but bears and other animals are finding the suburban habitat also to their liking.
Appealing, right? Yeah.
Right.
There's an awful lot of restaurants around, I guess, with dumpsters. And,
yeah. Right.
Now, that's something that you deal with, and it is on the news a lot lately. So let's talk about bears specifically.
Okay.
What's going on there?
Well, the bear population is growing quite dramatically. If you go back 2.5 to 3 decades, the sighting of a bear in Connecticut would have been a very rare event. And we've been monitoring sightings now over that period to the point where there were almost 0, and now we're receiving in the neighborhood of 3,000 bear sightings a year.
Wow.
All the other indices of a bear population are going up. The problems with bears, we have bears breaking into houses, bears being hit by vehicles, that's been growing steadily to the point where it's about 30 per year, bears killed by vehicles.
Wow, and those things are so big, you would think that they would practically bounce right off the vehicle and just go on their merry way.
Well, that does happen at times, as far as we know. The report of a vehicle hitting a bear, not a bear hitting a vehicle.
And a bear barely budging.
And then the bear walking off.
Yeah.
But we do know that there's 25 to 30 that are killed every year at this point by cars too.
Now, the fact that the population is growing, were they introduced back into the wild, or was it just a matter of allowing nature to take its course on its own?
Well, they were not introduced.
Okay.
It's an expansion from remnant populations for us from western Massachusetts. It's not fully nature taking its course. Wildlife management, which started in the early 1900s, where humans said, we can get information on animals, we can apply science to managing and conserving wildlife. The conservation efforts for black bear were so good that they've actually done quite well and are very abundant across North America and in Connecticut, increasing rapidly.
You know, as a wildlife biologist, it kind of makes you feel good that the job is being done correctly when you see a population come back.
Oh yeah, there's many success stories, and from white-tailed deer, you're going to talk about white-tailed deer, beaver, fisher, bobcat, just untold success stories, and even in what we call non-game, like bald eagles. Bald eagles have been delisted recently. What a lot of people don't realize is that much of the funding, much of the training of wildlife biologists has come about through the efforts of hunting interests.
Is that right, really?
Yeah.
You wouldn't think that, would you?
You wouldn't,
Yeah.
but hunters were one of the first to notice over 100 years ago that populations of wildlife were declining. They have the special interest in that.
Well, it's their own self-interest.
Right,
It's their own,
self-interest, and a very successful program was put in place where hunters agreed on a self-tax. Hunting equipment is taxed at the federal level, and that money then is distributed to the states to help for conservation projects, and that's been just so successful over the decades, and really has been a key factor in bringing back a lot of these wildlife species.
That, and as a biologist, is it like proof that life can adapt and thrive even in not so perfect conditions?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, for a group, as I said earlier, for
That's
a group
good.
of the wildlife species, yes. We see animals now living in areas that 40, 50 years ago, you wouldn't think that they would live under those conditions. Beavers, I tell people, we all often get reports of beavers living near malls, because every mall has a parking lot and there's a drainage system around the parking lot.
Yeah. And
the
they like to
beavers,
build there, right?
The beavers like to move in,
Yeah.
and they find food and water there.
Yeah, so it's perfect for them. For those species that are doing well or making a comeback, is it proof that industry can exist and maybe even expand, human population-wise? Can we build a, mall, as you say, and still have, conservation exist? Can they be together?
Well,
or is it a fine line?
it's a very fine line.
Yeah.
It's there. If Connecticut was just malls, we wouldn't have the forest habitat or wetland habitat that we have, and So the species would decline as you remove the habitat. So Connecticut currently has quite a bit of forest habitat. About 60% of the state is forested, which a lot of people don't realize.
Right.
And that's more than it was 100 years ago. And so our forest-dependent species are doing quite well. You mentioned development, malls was your example, but residential development, roads. Those things take away habitat. So if there's still habitat near them, the animals can survive. But the other factor that when you think about development is, I guess, the social aspect. I tell people if there's a neighborhood and it's near habitat, and the people that live there are willing to live near coyotes and bears and deer, then that's going to be good habitat for coyotes and bears and deer.
Yeah.
If the adjoining habitat, if the people that live there just will not stand the presence of those species, then that's no longer suitable habitat.
That's a big problem.
So
yeah.
it's a term we call cultural carrying capacity.
We only have a minute left, so I want to allow you to just talk about anything you want as far as getting the word out, or you want people to just be aware of, and then we'll go into our second segment. I also want you to give out, if you can, a website for people to go to and learn more.
Okay. Well, our website.
And we're going to put the graphic up on the screen.
I don't have the full website.
The graphic will be up on the screen, so that's not a problem.
It'll be CTDEEP.
All right. And in our final minute or so, just anything you want to, any misconceptions or anything that people might need to be made aware of? Or?
Well, we talked earlier about how many species of wildlife have done quite well and are being quite successful, and people don't realize that there right now is a very strong need for management of the species. You're going to talk about deer, bear. We have several hundred bear conflicts every year. Beavers. There's so many of these species, coyotes, beavers, bear, do create problems for people, and we now need to try to balance and manage the populations rather than try to protect every single animal.
Especially if they could be aggressive, and that would be another problem
or types of property damage,
Yeah.
or just a public safety threat, even if they aren't. Even if it isn't from the aggression of the animal.
Right. People have a tendency to, panic and decide that all kinds of sweeping changes need to be made, and we don't want to go back in the other direction.
Right. So we're trying to strike a balance.
Paul Rigo's a wildlife biologist. He's also part of the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. We could have talked a lot longer, but we have to get your fellow wildlife biologists on, so thank you for being on the show.
Well, you're welcome.
We will take a break and come back. I'm Sean Murphy. This is For the Record. Stay with us. Welcome back to For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. My guest for this segment is yet another wildlife biologist, also from the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. He is Howard Kilpatrick. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sean. Glad to be here.
One funny thing, off the air, you said that Paul said everything you wanted to say on the segment, so now you have nothing left.
That's right. Thank you for inviting me.
No problem. But, we can touch on some areas of speciality for you, but is there anything that you wanted to follow up with what Paul might have said that you wanted to expound upon at all? Or?
No, I think he hit a lot of good points. Wildlife has adapted to living with humans, at least many species have.
Right.
But there's also a segment of the public that is losing their tolerance to living in close proximity to bears or deer and things like that. So yeah, they've adapted, but there's also some segment of the public that is not real excited about abundance of wildlife in their neighborhoods.
Especially when they have a perception of how the wildlife could be dangerous, especially with their pets or if their child is around or anything like that.
Yeah, and with deer in particular, the things they're concerned about is deer damaging their gardens.
Yeah.
They work hard all summer to grow them. hitting a deer with their vehicle.
Right here.
You know, people have called and said, I've been in 3 deer vehicle accidents and you need to do something about it.
Mine was on I-95, so that was on the highway. So I was going full speed and
Right.
and hit them. So, and they really, it's true what they say about them. They just lock onto you and won't even try to get out of the way. you
Right.
know?
So you know, that's the safety issue, and then there's also the health issue. They play a role in the spread of Lyme disease.
Right.
And when someone says, you know, 3 members of my family has Lyme disease in the past 5 years, now they're fed up with having deer in their neighborhood.
When you hear someone say a cute little fawn wanders into the yard, and you know they might not be timid, and they might even come up to you, that's actually probably not a good idea, right? You necessarily wouldn't want that.
I mean, typically,
They're not aggressive, but unless they're mating or something.
right. I mean, typically the fawns will not move a lot. They'll stay in thicker cover. Every once in a while, they'll come into the yard. You know, if it's a day or 2 old, it may not be overly concerned about being close to humans. If it's a couple of weeks old, it's probably going to be less likely.
Yeah, it's skittish
Yeah.
at that point.
The only thing is that the longer deer live in residential areas and see people and cars and kids playing in the yard, the less concerned they get. So they appear to be more
Docile, maybe? Or,
right.
Yeah.
And you know, some people get to the point where they clap pans together to get the deer to run out, and they just look at them, go back and start eating because they're used to this kind of commotion.
Yeah, and it doesn't work. Yeah, and you want them out of there.
Right.
Would you say that deer is probably the most common species as far as, you know, you hear reports of overpopulation and they really get overbearing as far as their invasion into human territory?
I think on a large scale, yes. You know, throughout, especially the eastern U.S., deer have adapted to living in many of these urban, suburban settings. People see groups of 10 or 12 deer in their backyard. And, you know, part of the reason we've got so many deer is not just that they can adapt to living close to humans, but also we primarily use the hunting season to control deer populations. And if a water company owns 10,000 acres and it's close to hunting, you basically have a reservoir of deer.
They can just all live there protected, basically,
Right, and reproduce.
Yeah.
And continue to expand. So it's these little pockets of reserves that, you know, contribute a lot to our urban deer problems.
And like we were talking in the first segment, there's not a lot of natural predators for them, right? There are some, but
Right, and most of the predators are in the northern portion of Connecticut. You know, the bears, you know, coyotes will take some, bobcats will take some. But, you know, there's very few bears in southern Connecticut, and there's still coyotes and bobcats, but they're just not real efficient predators. They prey
they're
on a whole
smaller
host
too,
of
right?
species.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's not like you see on TV, you know, a tiger or a lion taking them down easy. These are smaller predators, so
Right.
it's tough. Let's talk about some other areas of, as far as your speciality goes, as far as species. Who do you want to talk about?
The other species I work with a lot is the New England cottontail.
Okay.
Currently, we have 2 species of cottontail rabbits in Connecticut. One is the native New England cottontail, and one is the introduced eastern cottontail.
Now, why are rabbits endangered?
Well, as of today, rabbits are not endangered. What we see as a trend is that eastern cottontails are expanding their range, and New England cottontails are shrinking their range.
Huh.
And then places like southern New Hampshire, Maine, where we're near the edge of the range, those populations are dwindling even quicker. Then there are some places like Rhode Island where they used to have easterns and New Englands, and now they can only find eastern cottontails. Connecticut probably has the largest population of New England cottontails in the New England and eastern New York area.
Is it because of the 60% of forest in the state? I mean, does that have something to do with it? Or?
Yeah, actually, you know, bears, they need forested habitat. Cottontails actually need forest to be cut to have thickets come up. And so basically, because these thickets are now maturing into forest land, they just don't have a lot of good quality habitat. So part of our effort to prevent New England cottontails from becoming listed as endangered species is to create and enhance habitat. So our district staff has actually gone in and implemented, about 15 projects over the past couple of years to expand existing habitat for cottontail rabbits.
Now, a rabbit, like a deer, is one of those critters that will love to chow down on a person's garden, right?
Yes, and that is certainly a concern that people have, but you don't have the concern about, Lyme disease and
Right.
deer vehicle accidents. And there are a lot of predators, hawks, owls, coyotes, fox, bobcats, house cats, that prey on rabbits. Unlike deer, there's many, many fewer.
Right. You hear the old stereotype about rabbits, and you kind of find it hard to believe that they could become extinct because of their mating habits, right?
That's right. I mean, rabbits are rabbits. But the key limitation is really suitable habitat. If you've got a quarter-acre patch of good cover, and there's one rabbit in there, if a predator goes into that quarter-acre patch, it's got a pretty good chance of finding that one rabbit. Whereas if you had a 100-acre patch in one rabbit, the chance of finding that rabbit is much less. So it's really creating thicker, denser, larger patches to increase their survival rates.
I don't know if you're familiar with a situation over in the eastern part of Connecticut where Route 9 was supposedly, they were trying forever to get it finished so it would connect, not Route 9, I'm sorry, Route 11 to Route 2.
Yep.
And one of the issues was the protection of, I thought it was brown rabbit or something like that, but there was a rabbit issue, a protection issue. Right?
Yeah, it was a New England cottontail,
Yeah.
and in fact, we had a rabbit donated to us from a hunter that we identified as a New England cottontail from that region. So they still exist there, and right now they're on a regional basis. They're considered. They're being considered for listing by the Fish and Wildlife Service as threatened or endangered. In Connecticut, they're doing pretty well, but as a result, collectively, all the New England states and New York, along with the Fish and Wildlife Service and universities, have worked on putting together a conservation strategy to ensure that the species recovers and isn't listed. So as a result of that, they've put a lot of new habitat on the ground throughout New England to expand existing habitat. They created a captive breeding program at the Roger Williams Zoo in Rhode Island, in which Connecticut trapped New England cottontails, gave them the zoo, and now they're reproducing, and now they're going to be redistributing those rabbits out into the landscape.
We've had them on Roger Williams Zoo a couple of times on this show too. You kind of answered a question that I was going to ask, and just by virtue of your description, I was going to ask if you, because of the nature of what you do, there has to be a lot of cooperation with neighboring states. It goes hand in hand, right?
Yeah, especially because it's being considered for federal listing. It's really all the states within that region. So there's been a really big effort to, make progress to prevent the listing of the New England cottontail. So I think the Fish and Wildlife Service needs to decide by 2014, and if they see that we are collectively making progress, then they will reevaluate annually, but will not list it. So we're all making a very big effort to show progress on the ground. And through management and research, we're documenting everything.
As a wildlife biologist, what else, as far as your areas of specialty, that is a concern for you? And also, is it more important to show progress with species that are coming back, or put more emphasis on those that are approaching the endangered list?
Well, both are important. Certainly, if we can prevent a species from being listed, and this one's very close, that's very important. If it becomes listed, there's a whole host of other issues with, getting permits and stuff to do development that would exist. So if we can prevent it from getting on the list, that's very important.
Did you, how long ago did you realize that, back in your early days that you wanted to be a biologist and, specifically a wildlife biologist? How did it come about?
I would say probably as a kid, I used to follow my dad around through the woods while he was hunting, and was very interested in wildlife, enjoyed being out in the woods, and that's what made me decide to be a wildlife biologist.
It's interesting because, in the first segment, chatting with Paul, hunters, were an impetus to, for conservation, and you wouldn't think that they necessarily go hand in hand. You think the hunters just want to go out, shoot what they can, and not worry about, the availability the next time. But that's not the case at all.
Right. In fact, we had done a survey of the deer hunters as our moose population began to grow. We said, do you think we should at some point consider, allowing some type of moose hunting season? And many of the hunters said, no, we don't have enough. We really need to have more before we can even think about, having a moose hunt. So yeah, that's something that, they're interested in wildlife and they want to see populations exist.
They're very enlightened. The hunters now, they're very, they understand conservation. It's for their own well-being, obviously, for what they do, but, it's good that you can work hand in hand with them and actually get help from them. We're going to put the website up on the screen one more time for people to go and learn more if you're interested in environmental protection and conservation, and maybe next time we'll have somebody from the energy side so they can talk about that as well. Howard Kilpatrick, a wildlife biologist and also part of the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. It was a pleasure having you on the show today,
Great,
too.
thank you very much.
And thank you for joining us for another edition of For the Record. You can see this show and many others on our YouTube site. We'll see you next time. Take care.